small, quiet town. Green trees and oak for miles and miles. Snow-covered streets and treetops all around you. It looks so peaceful, doesn't it? The snow gently falling down to earth. It might even look like some sort of commercial or winter paradise from the outside. But from the inside, in this small little cozy town, there are some very sick people. They may mask it with a smile, a warm greeting, a hamper for you at Christmas. But in this little town, some strange things keep happening, and nobody really knows why. It is Christmas time, and a time where people should be jolly. But in this town, it is quite the opposite. I come to as usual, somewhere on the floor, a whiskey bottle nearby, the blistering light reflecting off the snow, shining through my window as a natural alarm clock. I survive nowadays on a diet of cigarettes, coffee, and whiskey. And I mostly drink coffee because I can hide my whiskey in there. My name is Detective Jack Miller. I'm the only detective in this little town. Every member of this town knows me and has my phone number. When I first arrived in this town 5 years ago, you would get the odd call about a missing cat, or at the most, an odd stereo robbery. But recently, things have taken a more sinister turn. It started out with the town's locals receiving sick letters containing personal information, death threats, and recently, it has escalated into murder, something this town has never really heard of before. As you can imagine, the town is in disarray, and I am their only point of contact. 2 days ago, a sweet old man, 82 years old, was murdered in his home. The only clue I have to run with is a neighbor saw a man dressed as Santa Claus, fleeing the scene. This guy is so confident in not being caught, he even had the balls to wear a Santa costume, just to rub it in my face. He probably knows I'm a good-for-nothing drunk detective. I really hate Christmas. My wife disappeared at Christmas time, believed to have been murdered, but they never found her body. She could still be alive for all they know. I turned to drink after that, and they sent me from the big city to a small town when the quality of my work went downhill. Every so often, I have these blackouts. My therapist tells me they are stress-related. I personally think they are more whiskey-related. Like clockwork, Sid, my assistant, my right-hand man, honks his horn outside of my house. I put on my tie and finish my cigarette, and down one last Irish coffee to start the day. I look a mess, unshaven, stick-thin, with a crumpled tie, but I'm used to this now. As I turn to leave the house, I see a lot of my wife's belongings still here. It is almost like she never left. Sometimes, I can still feel her here with me. I get in the patrol car with Sid. He hands me a coffee. He really looks up to me, even though he shouldn't. I'm a shadow of the detective I once was, but solving this case will change all that for me. I just had to find out who was murdering people in this small town. I have a short list of suspects, people that have been caught doing weird things in the past. There is Mr. Adams, who owns a bagel store downtown. 2 years ago, he got caught beating up a prostitute in the middle of the street. I go in every morning and buy a bagel. I don't even like bagels, but I want him to know I'm there. I do this with every suspect on the list. I drive slowly past their house. I visit their place of work. I want them to know I'm always watching, and I will find whoever is responsible. On my last stop off, I go slowly past Dr. O'Higgins' clinic, and I make sure to honk my horn and wave as I slowly drive past. I'm particularly suspicious of him. He knows personal information of pretty much everyone in this town, similar to the writer of the abusive letters. Dr. O'Higgins waves back at me with a nervous smile. Me and Sid head on to the station. Half a day goes by. When Sid comes running into my office, he tells me there has been an anonymous tip-off that a man has been seen late last night, acting suspicious, dressed as Santa Claus, and the description fitted the profile of a local man named Mr. Stevenson. I felt myself wake up as the tip came in. Mr. Stevenson was not on my shortlist, but he did have a troubled past. He had been fired from the local cinema after supposedly harassing young female guests. I picked up my coat and told Sid to get the car. I felt my heart pounding as we drove down to Mr. Stevenson's house. I always get this way when I'm chasing a lead. There is an adrenaline there that I cannot explain. We arrive at the house, and I knock on the door. Mrs. Stevenson opens the front door. "Is your husband there?" I ask. She tells me yes, and lets us in. I interview the couple for a good 30 minutes. They have a strong story, and seem genuinely concerned with what is happening in their town. I ask if I can have a look around the house. They tell me no problem. I search the downstairs of the house, while Sid talks to the couple in the living room. I find nothing downstairs, but something in my gut tells me to check the cupboard under the stairwell. I open the stairwell door, and I see it, staring me in the face. Exactly what I wanted to see. A Santa Claus costume, covered in blood. I yell to Sid to arrest Mr. Stevenson. I take in the costume for evidence. Mr. Stevenson bursts into tears and says he has no idea what that costume is, and that he'd never seen it before. I've heard it all a million times over. It doesn't affect me anymore. Tell it to a judge, you sick fuck. We took Mr. Stevenson in for questioning. He stuck by his story and spent the night in jail. He was so persuasive that even the hardest to convince were starting to believe him by the end of the night. The night went past. I woke up on my floor as usual, did my morning routine, sobered up a bit, and headed into the station with Sid. We arrived to be greeted by some terrible news. The murderer had struck again last night, killing a young student nurse. He had left her hanging from the front porch of her dorms. The killer wanted to make a statement. He wanted to let us know that we had the wrong guy in custody. I took a lot of heat from the chief. He phoned into the station to berate me and remind me that I was on a final warning. I was devastated. I had screwed up again, and now another victim was murdered. As I walked into my office, I could feel something was out of place. I then saw a letter on my desk. I quickly opened it. Inside the letter, there was a photo of the murdered trainee nurse and a message saying, "Detective Miller, you have the wrong man. Meet me at the docks at 8 p.m. Come alone and don't be late." I had a lot of questions going through my mind. I was supposed to inform my superiors, but I wanted to be the one to solve this case. Solving this case would be my big break. Just before 8 p.m, I told Sid about the letter, and we headed down to the docks together. Sid drove, as usual. I'm obviously extremely nervous, but this is what I live for. I was about to finally meet this town's killer, once and for all. We arrived at the docks. There was nobody in sight. On the other side of the dock, there was a photo tied up against a pole with a ribbon bow. I ran up to the photo, and I nearly vomited when I saw it. It was a photo of her. A photo of my wife, dead, in some basement, with the caption, "Merry Christmas." It was personal now. I burst into tears and showed Sid the photo. This killer had gone one step too far this time. I had a few drinks, my only comfort. I wanted to call it a night, but then I remembered that on Christmas Day, I go down to the local orphanage late at night to hand out Christmas presents, dressed as Santa. I didn't want to let the kids down, so I put a Santa Claus costume on and began the drive over to the orphanage. During the drive, I drove past the Stevensons' residence. Mrs. Stevenson was in the front yard. As soon as she saw my car, she gave me the middle finger. I felt like driving on and ignoring her, but I stopped the car. I wanted to talk to her and explain things. She was home alone because her husband had left town to let things calm down. I got out of my car, and as soon as I did, she started screaming at me, telling me I was a no-good drunk and that I'd ruined her life. She kept going on and on, screaming and swearing. I could feel my blood boil with rage. I felt the red mist come over me. I felt like I was going to have one of my blackouts. Not now, I thought. And bang, just like that, it all goes black. When I open my eyes, I'm back at my house. I'm looking in the mirror, dressed as Santa Claus. I have blood and scratch marks all over my face. I have the feeling as though the rage has taken over again. Then I remember what I have done. In the mirror, I can see Mrs. Stevenson's dead body on the floor behind me. She just wouldn't shut up. She can go in the basement, in the freezer, along with the others, including my wife, who also like to scream and shout too much. You see, when the tie is on, I am Detective Miller. But when it is off, well, let's just say I'm something else. Something not even remotely human. I have absolutely no feelings of remorse. I am above the law in every way. I will plant fake evidence, imaginary clues, write abusive letters, make anonymous tip-offs. I play my own game. And it is kind of hard to be guilty when you're investigating yourself. Merry Christmas.